This is not ordinary. Not because something dramatic has just happened, but because something decisive has already been set in motion, quietly beneath the layer of emotion and thought, where most people live on autopilot. This moment is a deliberate interruption designed to break the cycle of passive waiting and unconscious repetition that so often passes for patience. You are not being startled awake. You are being invited to notice what has already begun. Beneath the surface of your awareness, movement is occurring that does not announce itself with intensity, noise, or reassurance. It does not demand belief, enthusiasm, or certainty. It simply unfolds whether you are watching closely or not. The mistake most people make at turning points is assuming that significance must arrive loudly, that clarity must precede response, or that permission must be granted before engagement is required. What is happening now does not follow that pattern. It is subtle by design because subtlety preserves agency. If the shift were obvious, overwhelming, or emotionally charged, it would coerce rather than invite. Instead, what you may be sensing is a quiet displacement, a slight internal reorientation that feels less like excitement and more like gravity. That gravity is not fear and it is not urgency. It is weight, the kind that comes from being positioned rather than from being pressured. You are not standing outside this process, hoping to be included. You are already inside it. The feeling that something is about to happen is misleading. What is more accurate is that something has already crossed a threshold, and your awareness is catching up to its implications. This is why the silence feels unfamiliar. Silence is often mistaken for absence, delay, or withdrawal, especially in a culture trained to equate movement with noise and progress with visibility. But silence in moments like this is not a void. It is preparation. It is recalibration. It is the necessary condition for alignment to stabilize without distortion. When systems recalibrate, they do not broadcast. They quiet competing signals so the adjustment can complete without interference. The same principle applies here. What feels like waiting is not stagnation. It is not punishment and it is not neglect. It is the suspension of unnecessary input so that what is already true can surface without being forced. This is where the central premise becomes important. Truth does not require pressure. It does not need persuasion, performance, or pursuit. Truth reveals itself when alignment is complete, not when effort peaks. Forcing clarity too early fractures it. Demanding resolution before readiness produces illusion rather than understanding. Alignment is not a reward for perfection, nor is it withheld until doubt disappears. It emerges when attention is steady enough to recognize what is already present. This is why the tone of this moment is not frantic or dramatic. There is no call to rush, no demand to act impulsively, no threat of loss designed to provoke fear. Urgency without panic is different from pressure. It does not shout. It does not beg. It simply states a fact. Attention determines access. What you consistently attend to becomes available to you not because it is created by attention, but because it is no longer obscured by distraction. Presence opens what already exists. Delay in this context is not neutral because delay reallocates attention elsewhere, and attention is the medium through which alignment completes itself. This does not mean you must strain or strive. It means you must be honest about where your awareness rests. Are you scanning for signs to reassure yourself, or are you grounded enough to let recognition arrive on its own terms? The gravity you may feel is not a warning. It is responsibility. Responsibility not as burden, but as acknowledgement that something meaningful is unfolding and that your role is not to manufacture it, but to meet it without distortion. Calm gravity allows truth to land intact. Panic fractures it. Hype cheapens it. Reassurance dulls it. What is required here is neither withdrawal nor acceleration, but steadiness. To remain present without demanding proof, to allow silence to do its work, without filling it with noise, to recognize that being positioned often feels quieter than being pursued. This is why the interruption matters, not to alarm you, but to remove you from passive drift. Passive Passive waiting is not the same as patience. Passive waiting disengages attention while hoping outcomes resolve themselves. Patience, in contrast, is active presence without force. It holds space without interference. It listens without grasping. It responds when response becomes clear, not when anxiety peaks. You are not being asked to believe anything extraordinary. You are being asked to notice what is already ordinary, but easily missed. That alignment is underway. That silence is functional. That truth is not fragile, and that your position within this process is not hypothetical. You are not on the verge of relevance. You are already relevant to what is unfolding. The question is not whether something will happen, but whether you will remain present enough to recognize it without trying to control it. This is how real turning points operate. They do not announce themselves with spectacle. They arrive as moments that feel deceptively simple, almost uneventful, until later when their significance becomes obvious in retrospect. By then, the response window has often passed. This introduction exists to narrow that gap, not by accelerating you, but by anchoring you. Calm gravity keeps perception clear. Fear scrambles it. Excitement distorts it. Indifference numbs it. Alignment requires none of those states. It requires response, not perfection. Response means staying available, attentive, and honest about what you sense without demanding that it justify itself immediately. What feels like nothing happening is often the final phase before something irreversible settles into place. And irreversible shifts do not need your urgency. They need your presence. Transformation almost always begins internally, long before it becomes visible as behavior, decision, or outcome. This is one of the most misunderstood aspects of change. People expect transformation to announce itself through action, confidence, or immediate redirection. But in reality, the deepest shifts occur beneath the level of performance. Before habits change, perception changes. Before decisions crystallize, internal orientation adjusts. What looks like stillness from the outside is often intense internal reorganization. Values realign priorities, reorder, and identity subtly recalibrates. Because these movements are internal, they are easy to dismiss or misinterpret as inactivity, confusion, or delay. Yet without this internal restructuring, external change would be shallow, unsustainable, or performative. Lasting transformation cannot skip the invisible phase. Divine guidance in this sense does not function as manipulation or coercion. It does not override will force compliance or demand obedience through fear or pressure. Instead, it operates as illumination. Illumination reveals what is already true, but previously obscured. It sharpens perception rather than controlling behavior. When guidance is genuine, it does not push someone into action before they are internally aligned with it. It clarifies reality until response becomes natural rather than forced. Manipulation seeks to bypass understanding to achieve outcome. Illumination deepens understanding so that outcome arises organically. This is why authentic guidance often feels quiet, almost understated. It respects agency. It allows recognition rather than enforcing movement. Clarity, when it forms this way, does so privately. There is rarely an announcement, a dramatic emotional surge, or a visible signal that something decisive has occurred. In fact, the absence of drama is often the sign that the process is real. Public certainty is easy to imitate. Private clarity cannot be faked. It develops in solitude, reflection, and silence, where competing voices lose influence. This private formation protects the integrity of the insight. If clarity arrived with spectacle or external validation, it would become vulnerable to distortion, ego, or premature expression. Silence gives clarity time to stabilize, to integrate fully into identity rather than remaining an idea that still needs reinforcement. Because of this, silence should not be interpreted as rejection, abandonment, or disinterest. Silence is incubation. It is the environment where internal transformation matures without interruption. Just as seeds develop underground, long before anything breaks the surface, Internal shifts require darkness, pressure, and time before they can sustain exposure. Premature exposure can damage what is still forming. Silence reduces interference, allowing alignment to settle deeply enough that it no longer depends on reassurance or explanation. What eventually emerges from this incubation is not sudden inspiration, but readiness. Action that follows internal transformation carries a different quality. It is calmer, more precise, less reactive. It does not seek permission or applause. It simply moves because movement now matches internal truth. Understanding this reframes waiting entirely. What appears inactive may be the most consequential phase of all, because once internal alignment completes, external behavior follows with far less effort. Silence was not the absence of guidance. It was the condition that allowed guidance to become clear without distortion. Separation is often interpreted as loss, rejection, or failure, especially in cultures that equate closeness with value and continuity with success. Yet separation can function not as a rupture, but as a corrective lens, one that sharpens perception rather than distorting it. When distance enters a relationship, a season, or an identity, it does not automatically mean something has broken. In many cases, it means something is being clarified. Separation strips away the noise created by habit, proximity, and emotional entanglement, allowing truth to surface without interference. What was once blurred by familiarity becomes defined. What was sustained by momentum alone is tested for substance. In this way, separation is less an ending and more a diagnostic tool, revealing what was real, what was assumed, and what was merely convenient. Distance removes distraction in a way closeness cannot. When people are constantly present in one another's lives, interaction can become automatic rather than intentional. Patterns replace presence. Roles replace reality. Emotional responses are shaped by routine instead of reflection. Separation interrupts this automation. Without immediate access to each other's energy reactions or reassurance, individuals are forced to encounter their own emotional landscape directly. Feelings that were muted by constant engagement become audible. Attachment is distinguished from alignment. Dependency is separated from connection. Distance exposes whether the bond was sustained by genuine understanding or by proximity alone. This is why separation often intensifies emotional clarity rather than diminishing it. In the absence of constant interaction, emotions lose their camouflage. What remains is what was always there but previously diluted. Affection that depended on habit weakens. Care rooted in truth deepens. Resentment that was masked by politeness surfaces. Longings that were misinterpreted as boredom are re-examined. Distance does not create these truths, it reveals them. By removing the distractions of immediacy, separation allows emotional reality to speak without interruption. Misunderstanding frequently accompanies separation, but misunderstanding does not erase authenticity. When distance is introduced, narratives rush in to fill the silence. Assumptions replace dialogue. Motives are guessed rather than known. Yet authenticity is not nullified by being unseen or misread. What is genuine does not require constant validation to remain real. In fact, authenticity often survives misunderstanding better than performance does. Performative connections rely on being witnessed correctly. Authentic ones persist even when perception falters. Separation tests whether something needs to be constantly affirmed to exist or whether it has intrinsic coherence. Time plays a crucial role in this process. While proximity can obscure depth through overexposure, time introduces perspective. Immediate closeness can flatten complexity, reducing people and situations to their most recent behavior or emotional charge. Time combined with distance restores dimension. Patterns become visible. Intentions are distinguished from reactions. What once felt confusing begins to organize itself into meaning. Depth often reveals itself slowly, not because it is weak, but because it is layered. Separation gives these layers room to emerge without being rushed into premature conclusions. Paradoxically, proximity can sometimes hide depth by overwhelming it. Constant interaction generates friction, expectation, and emotional static. Small misunderstandings accumulate. Nuance is lost in immediacy. Distance reduces this friction, allowing what is essential to stand out. When contact is limited, what remains significant rises to the surface. What mattered only because it was nearby fades. In this sense, separation acts as a filter distinguishing essence from excess. Separation also corrects distorted relational optics. When people are too close for too long, without recalibration, blind spots form. Familiarity breeds assumptions. Roles harden. Growth in one individual may go unnoticed because the other still relates to an outdated version of them. Distance disrupts these fixed images. It forces re-seeing. When reconnection occurs, if it does so with updated perception rather than inherited expectation. Even when reconnection does not occur, the clarity gained remains valuable. It prevents false continuity and honors truth over comfort. Importantly, separation does not demand resolution to be meaningful. Its value lies not in whether things return to how they were, but in what becomes visible during the space. Some connections deepen after separation because they were rooted in substance. Others dissolve because they were sustained by convenience. Neither outcome is a failure. Both are revelations. Separation does not judge. It exposes. It does not punish. It clarifies. Emotional truth often needs space to be recognized. When feelings are constantly negotiated in real time, they can be influenced by guilt, fear, or obligation. Distance removes immediate consequences, allowing honesty to emerge without pressure. This honesty may confirm commitment, or it may reveal misalignment. Either way, it is truer than decisions made under emotional noise. Separation gives truth the quiet it needs to speak fully. Over time, what is deep proves resilient. Superficial bonds weaken without constant reinforcement, but depth does not require constant proximity to exist. It may even strengthen through absence as understanding matures and perception refines. Depth is not loud. It does not demand attention. It waits confident in its coherence. Separation allows this confidence to be tested without interference. Ultimately, separation reframes loss as discernment. It teaches that closeness is not the sole measure of connection and distance is not the enemy of truth. Sometimes the most accurate understanding emerges only when space is introduced. What survives that space is not accidental. What fades was already unstable. Separation, then, is not merely something to endure, it is something to learn from. It sharpens vision, restores honesty, and reveals the emotional truths that proximity alone can obscure. Authenticity is not primarily something that can be argued, defended, or fully explained. It carries resonance beyond language. When something is authentic, it is felt before it is understood. It does not rely on persuasion, justification, or narrative control to make itself known. Its coherence registers intuitively, often beneath conscious reasoning. This is why authenticity tends to be recognized unevenly. Some sense it immediately, others resist it entirely. Resonance does not depend on consensus. It depends on alignment between what is being perceived and the internal capacity of the one perceiving it. Where that capacity exists, authenticity is obvious. Where it does not, explanation fails. Because of this, truth cannot be permanently distorted by ego or fear. Ego and fear can delay recognition, suppress acknowledgement, or provoke misinterpretation, but they cannot rewrite what is real. Distortion requires constant energy to maintain. It depends on reinforcement, repetition, and defense. Truth, by contrast, is structurally stable. It does not need to be protected to remain intact. Even when it is obscured, it continues to exert quiet pressure on false structures, slowly exposing inconsistencies. Over time, distortion collapses under its own weight, not because truth attacks it, but because falsehood cannot sustain coherence indefinitely. This is why alignment does not operate persuasively. It does not convince, argue, or recruit. It operates energetically. Alignment alters the field rather than the mind. When someone is aligned, their presence carries internal congruence. What they think, feel, and act are no longer in conflict. This congruence is perceptible even when unspoken. Others may not be able to articulate why something feels grounded, trustworthy, or unsettling, but they sense the absence of internal contradiction. Alignment transmits through consistency, not performance. It influences without intention to influence. Persuasion attempts to override resistance by supplying reasons. Alignment bypasses resistance by dissolving the need for defense. Where persuasion meets the ego directly, alignment meets the deeper perceptual system. This is why aligned individuals often provoke strong reactions without doing anything overt. Their coherence highlights incoherence around them. This contrast can feel threatening to systems built on distortion, because alignment exposes misalignment without accusation. It does not need to name the problem for the problem to feel seen. Recognition then arises naturally when distortion dissolves. It is not forced. It cannot be rushed. As fear relaxes and ego loses its grip, perception clears. What once seemed confusing becomes obvious. What was resisted becomes undeniable. Recognition is not a moment of being convinced, but of remembering. It feels less like learning something new and more like finally seeing what was always there. This is why authentic truth often arrives quietly without triumph or drama. It does not announce itself as a victory. It simply becomes apparent once the noise that obscured it falls away. In this way, authenticity remains intact regardless of misunderstanding. It does not depend on timing, agreement, or validation to exist. Alignment ensures that truth continues to resonate even when it is ignored, misread, or temporarily buried. Eventually, when distortion can no longer sustain itself, recognition occurs not because truth demanded attention, but because nothing else could hold. Remembrance functions as a form of spiritual instruction, not because it replays the past, but because it recontextualizes it. Memory is not static storage. It is a living interface between experience and understanding. What is remembered is shaped by who is remembering. As consciousness matures, memory becomes less about emotional replay and more about structural insight. Events once felt only through reaction are revisited through awareness. In this way, remembrance teaches not by adding new information, but by revealing what was always present but previously inaccessible. Spiritual instruction through remembrance operates quietly. It does not arrive as sudden regret or nostalgia, but as subtle shifts in perception. A memory resurfaces not because the past is demanding attention, but because the present self is now capable of understanding it differently. This is why certain memories return unexpectedly, often during moments of stillness or transition. They are not interruptions. They are invitations. The psyche retrieves what the soul is ready to integrate. Timing matters. A lesson recalled too early would only repeat confusion. A lesson recalled at the right moment becomes clarity. As maturity increases, memories change meaning. The facts of what occurred remain the same, but the interpretation evolves. What once felt like loss may later reveal itself as protection. What once seemed overwhelming may later be recognized as depth. What once felt like rejection may later be understood as misalignment. This reinterpretation is not denial of pain. It is transcendence of limitation. Maturity allows memory to be held without self-defense. When the nervous system no longer needs to justify blame or idealize, memory becomes instructional rather than emotional. This is why remembrance often intensifies during periods of inner growth. As internal structures stabilize, unresolved impressions surface naturally. The mind no longer needs to suppress what it can now process. Memories return not to reopen wounds, but to close loops. They offer perspective rather than punishment. In this sense, remembrance is less about the past and more about integration. It allows fragments of experience to be reorganized into coherence. Comparison plays a critical role in this process, though it operates retroactively rather than competitively. When new experiences are encountered, they silently illuminate the nature of earlier ones. Depth is revealed not when it is present, but when it is absent elsewhere. Only after engaging with contrast does the mind recognize what it previously lacked language to name. This is why comparison often brings delayed recognition. It is not that the original experience changed, but that the capacity to measure it did. Retroactive comparison is not about idealization. It does not inflate the past unrealistically. Instead, it sharpens perception. When shallower interactions fail to resonate, the nervous system remembers what resonance felt like. When inconsistency replaces steadiness, the body recalls coherence. This remembering is not sentimental. It is diagnostic. It identifies qualities that were once normalized and therefore unnoticed. Depth often goes unrecognized in proximity because it feels natural. Only distance or contrast reveals its rarity. This is how understanding matures without bitterness. Rather than lamenting what was lost, the individual begins to see what was encountered. Recognition arises not as regret, but as recalibration. The internal compass adjusts. Standards clarify. Discernment sharpens. Memory contributes not to longing, but to alignment. It informs future choices by refining perception of what is real, stable, and resonant. Reflection in this framework becomes an internal reckoning rather than regret. Regret seeks to reverse time. Reckoning seeks to integrate truth. Regret fixates on imagined alternatives. Reckoning confronts actual patterns. It does not ask, "What if I had done differently?" but what was actually happening and why did I respond the way I did? This shift is subtle but profound. It moves the individual from self-judgment to self-awareness. Internal reckoning is honest without being punitive. It acknowledges where fear operated, where avoidance shaped decisions, where immaturity limited response. But it does not weaponize this awareness. Instead, it uses it to refine character. Reckoning extracts wisdom without attaching shame. It recognizes that earlier versions of the self operated with limited tools. Growth does not require condemnation of the past. It requires understanding it accurately. This is why remembrance paired with maturity feels clarifying rather than destabilizing. The emotional charge of memory diminishes as insight increases. What once triggered longing or pain begins to elicit neutrality or even gratitude. Not because the experience was easy, but because it was formative. Memory becomes less about what was endured and more about what was learned. Spiritual instruction through remembrance also restores continuity of identity. It helps the individual see themselves not as a series of disconnected reactions, but as a coherent trajectory of development. Patterns emerge. Themes repeat. Lessons echo. This continuity fosters compassion toward the self. It reveals that confusion was not failure, but part of a larger process of differentiation and growth. Importantly, remembrance does not force reconciliation with the past. It does not demand renewed contact, reversal of boundaries, or emotional regression. Integration is internal. One can honor the truth of what was without re-entering it. Spiritual instruction is complete when memory no longer pulls the individual backward, but stands neutrally behind them as reference rather than gravity. As memories resurface with new interpretation, they lose their power to destabilize. They become informational rather than directive. They inform discernment without dictating behavior. This is a sign of maturity. The past no longer governs the present, it supports it. Reflection ceases to be compulsive and becomes intentional. In this way, remembrance serves evolution. It does not trap the soul in repetition. It releases it from confusion. By revisiting experience through clarity rather than emotion, the individual reclaims authorship over their narrative. Meaning is no longer assigned by circumstance, but by understanding. What once happened to them becomes something that shaped them. Ultimately, remembrance as spiritual instruction is an act of alignment. It aligns past experience with present awareness. It reconciles what was felt with what is now known. It transforms memory from burden into teacher. And when this transformation is complete, reflection no longer asks for emotional repayment. It offers quiet confirmation. The depth was real, the growth was earned, and the understanding arrived exactly when it could be received. Awakening is often misunderstood as relief, as if clarity arrives to lift weight from the soul and replace struggle with ease. In truth, awakening does not remove responsibility, it introduces it. Before awareness, much can be excused as confusion, conditioning, or circumstance. Once clarity appears, those explanations lose their power. To see clearly is to become accountable for what is seen. Awakening is not an escape from weight. It is the recognition of where weight truly belongs and the decision to carry it consciously rather than unconsciously. Responsibility emerges the moment distortion dissolves. When someone genuinely understands their own patterns, motivations, and fears, they can no longer claim ignorance. This does not mean they become perfect or fearless. It means they become honest. Awareness shifts the question from, "Why is this happening to me?" to "What am I choosing, avoiding, or protecting?" That shift is irreversible. Once the inner lens adjusts, life can no longer be lived passively. Awakening demands participation. Clarity forces confrontation because it removes the comfort of vagueness. Fear that once hid behind uncertainty becomes visible. Pride that once disguised itself as self-respect reveals its defensiveness. Avoidance that once felt like patience exposes itself as delay. This confrontation is not aggressive or external. It is internal and unavoidable. The mind can no longer look away without knowing it is doing so. This is why awakening often feels unsettling at first. The nervous system loses familiar excuses before it has learned new forms of stability. Fear is often the first to surface under clarity. Not dramatic fear, but subtle fear. The fear of vulnerability, of loss of control, of being seen accurately. Awakening illuminates where fear has been quietly steering decisions. It shows how caution has limited expression, how self-protection has prevented connection, how hesitation has masqueraded as discernment. This exposure is uncomfortable because fear thrives in ambiguity. Once named, it can no longer operate invisibly. Pride follows closely behind. Pride is not always arrogance. More often it is rigidity. It is the need to preserve a self-image, to avoid appearing wrong, to maintain authority by withholding openness. Awakening reveals how pride has delayed honesty or blocked repair. It shows where silence was chosen not for peace, but to avoid discomfort. Confronting pride feels destabilizing because it requires humility, and humility dismantles false safety structures. Avoidance is perhaps the most painful to face because it is so easily rationalized. Awakening exposes the cost of waiting, the consequences of postponement, the emotional debts accumulated through inaction. It reveals that what was framed as not the right time was often not the right courage. This realization can sting, but it is also liberating. Once avoidance is seen, clearly choice becomes possible again. Discomfort is not a sign that something is wrong in this process. It is a prerequisite for emotional integrity. Integrity requires alignment between what is known and what is lived. When awareness increases faster than behavior adjusts, discomfort arises. This discomfort is not punishment, it is feedback. It signals a gap between truth and action. The body and psyche register this gap as tension, restlessness, or unease. These sensations are not obstacles to awakening, they are its indicators. Emotional integrity cannot be achieved without passing through this phase. Before integrity, there is friction. The self must reorganize. Old coping strategies lose effectiveness before new ones are established. The individual may feel temporarily ungrounded, as if familiar reference points no longer hold. This is not regression, it is recalibration. Integrity is built when actions begin to reflect awareness, not before. This is where many mistake refinement for punishment. They interpret the difficulty of this phase as evidence of failure or divine reprimand. In reality, refinement is the process by which excess distortion is burned away. Punishment seeks to inflict pain as consequence. Refinement uses pressure to produce precision. Punishment shames. Refinement clarifies. Punishment immobilizes. Refinement strengthens. Refinement does not ask, "How can this hurt more?" It asks, "What must be removed for truth to stand unobstructed?" It targets inefficiency, not worth. When discomfort arises during awakening, it is not because the individual is wrong, but because they are becoming accurate. Accuracy can be painful when it contradicts long-held narratives, but it is stabilizing once integrated. Unlike punishment, refinement is purposeful and proportional. It does not overwhelm beyond capacity. It arrives in layers matching readiness. Each confrontation is calibrated to what the individual can process. This is why awakening unfolds gradually rather than all at once. Too much clarity without integration would fracture rather than strengthen. The process respects the nervous system's limits even as it stretches them. Responsibility then becomes an act of self-respect rather than burden. It is the willingness to respond to truth rather than resist it. This response may involve difficult conversations, altered boundaries, or changed priorities. It may require releasing identities that no longer fit. None of this is easy, but all of it is coherent. Responsibility aligns the inner and outer worlds, reducing the friction that once caused suffering. As refinement continues, discomfort begins to shift in quality. It becomes cleaner, less chaotic. Instead of diffuse anxiety, there is focused resolve. Instead of confusion, there is clarity about what must be done even if it is difficult. Emotional integrity starts to take shape. The individual no longer needs to convince themselves of their truth. They live it. This embodiment reduces internal conflict. Peace emerges not from avoidance, but from congruence. Awakening at its core is not about transcendence of human struggle. It is about maturity within it. It replaces unconscious reaction with conscious response. It replaces inherited patterns with chosen values. It does not promise comfort, but coherence. And coherence, once established, creates a deeper and more durable form of peace. In the end, awakening is not gentle because truth is not always gentle. But it is precise. It does not wound aimlessly. It cuts away what no longer serves so that what is essential can remain. Responsibility is not the cost of awakening, it is its expression. When clarity is honored with action, discomfort completes its purpose and recedes. What remains is emotional integrity. A state where fear no longer governs pride, no longer defends avoidance, no longer delays, and refinement is recognized not as suffering, but as alignment made real. Waiting is often mislabeled as passivity, as if stillness implies indecision or fear. In reality, waiting can be an expression of dignity. Dignity is not the absence of desire, it is the presence of self-command. When someone waits without collapsing into pursuit, they are not doing nothing, they are holding their ground. They are allowing truth, timing, and alignment to reveal themselves without interference. This kind of waiting is not empty space, it is maintained posture. Dignified waiting emerges when a person understands that their worth is not contingent on immediate response or validation. It is a refusal to reduce oneself into urgency. Passivity gives power away by disengaging from agency. Dignity preserves power by choosing not to act prematurely. The difference lies in consciousness. Waiting that is unconscious feels stagnant and heavy. Waiting that is conscious feels grounded and deliberate. One drains energy, the other consolidates it. Restraint is often misunderstood as a lack of desire, but it is more accurately a measure of depth. Desire that is shallow demands instant gratification. Desire that is mature can tolerate delay without eroding self-respect. Restraint is not suppression, it is regulation. It is the ability to feel fully without being ruled by impulse. This is strength because it demonstrates internal hierarchy. Emotion is acknowledged, but not allowed to commandeer action. True restraint requires clarity of value. When someone knows what they carry, they do not rush to place it in unsteady hands. They do not bargain with their own standards to reduce discomfort. Restraint protects what is valuable by refusing to expose it to misalignment. This is not avoidance. It is discernment embodied. Desire remains intact, but it is disciplined by self-trust. Refusing to chase is one of the most misunderstood forms of authority. Chasing appears active, but it is reactive. It places the center of gravity outside the self. The one who chases adjusts, compensates, and overextends in response to another's uncertainty. Internal authority dissolves under this pattern because action is no longer rooted in self-alignment, but in the hope of external movement. Refusal to chase is not indifference. It is sovereignty. When someone stops chasing, they reclaim authorship over their energy. They no longer attempt to convince, persuade, or perform for recognition. This refusal restores internal authority because it signals a non-negotiable boundary. I do not abandon myself to be chosen. Authority is not asserted loudly. It is felt through consistency. The one who does not chase becomes anchored. Their presence stabilizes because it is no longer scattered across anticipation and anxiety. Self-respect is the stabilizing force beneath all of this. It is not confidence in outcome, but loyalty to self. Self-respect regulates behavior under pressure. It prevents emotional leakage through over-explanation, over-giving, or overreaching. When self-respect is intact, a person does not need to defend their value. Their actions already reflect it. This creates energetic coherence. There is no contradiction between what they feel, think, and do. An energetically stable field is one where intention and behavior are aligned. Chasing destabilizes this field because it introduces desperation, even when subtle. Desperation fractures coherence. It creates noise. Self-respect quiets the field. It removes excess movement. In that quiet, clarity becomes more pronounced not just for the individual, but for those interacting with them. Stability is perceptible. It communicates without words. Waiting from self-respect feels different than waiting from fear. Fear waits with tension, scanning for signs, rehearsing outcomes. Self-respect waits with presence. It does not lean forward or pull back. It remains centered. This centeredness is not neutral, it is magnetic. It does not attempt to draw anything in, yet it becomes unmistakable. Others feel it as groundedness, as certainty without pressure. Dignified waiting also preserves choice. Chasing narrows options by committing energy before alignment is confirmed. Waiting keeps the field open without being unguarded. It allows information to surface. It allows others to reveal themselves through action rather than promise. In this way, waiting is not delay, it is assessment. It protects against premature attachment and misread signals. Restraint, refusal to chase, and self-respect all converge into one principle: internal authority precedes external alignment. When authority is intact, waiting does not weaken momentum, it refines it. Movement that follows restraint is cleaner, more accurate, and less costly. There is no need to recover energy because it was never depleted. Ultimately, waiting as dignity is not about time, it is about posture. It is the posture of someone who knows that what is meant to meet them does not require self-erasure. Strength is not proven by pursuit. It is demonstrated by the ability to remain whole while time does its work. In that wholeness, the energetic field stabilizes, and what aligns does so without force, drawn not by urgency but by coherence. Mirrored development deepens when both individuals begin to experience internal shifts that no longer feel reactive to each other, but responsive to truth. At this stage, growth is no longer fueled by longing, frustration, or anticipation. It is sustained by integration. Each person is absorbing lessons that were once resisted. Patterns that once repeated unconsciously begin to dissolve without dramatic effort. This is how parallel growth matures quietly, steadily, and without spectacle. One of the most important markers of mirrored development is the disappearance of urgency. Urgency thrives when one side is ahead emotionally and the other is lagging. In alignment, urgency evaporates because neither person is trying to extract movement from the other. Clarity does not demand reassurance, and peace does not require explanation. Both states are internally sourced. This creates a relational vacuum where manipulation, projection, and fantasy cannot survive. As clarity increases on one side, it is not used as leverage. It is not weaponized as insight or superiority. True clarity humbles. It reveals responsibility rather than entitlement. The clearer one becomes, the less they feel compelled to announce it. At the same time as peace deepens on the other side, it is not mistaken for indifference. Peace does not withdraw emotionally. It stabilizes emotionally. It removes agitation, not care. This distinction is essential because many misunderstand peace as emotional distance and clarity as emotional intensity. In reality, clarity calms and peace sharpens. Clarity removes confusion, which reduces emotional volatility. Peace removes fear, which increases perceptiveness. Together, they create a shared energetic language that does not rely on words. Recognition begins to occur beneath conversation. Mirrored development also reveals itself through restraint in narrative. Neither person feels the need to rewrite the past excessively or justify previous behavior. There is an understanding that insight arrived when it was able to arrive. Blame dissolves because it no longer serves learning. Forgiveness is not granted theatrically. It emerges organically as understanding replaces resentment. This is not emotional bypassing, it is emotional maturity. Another sign of symmetry without dependency is the absence of bargaining with fate. When alignment is emerging, neither person tries to negotiate outcomes through behavior. There is no, "if I do this, then they will," mindset. Action becomes self-referenced. Decisions are made because they are right, not because they are strategic. This restores dignity on both sides and prevents imbalance from re-entering the dynamic. Importantly, mirrored development does not guarantee immediate reunion communication or visible change. That assumption itself belongs to attachment, not alignment. Alignment ensures readiness, not outcome. It ensures that if and when paths cross again, the meeting will occur without distortion. If they do not, it still confirms that growth was not wasted or contingent. This is what preserves autonomy. Symmetry also manifests in how both individuals relate to uncertainty. Earlier stages are marked by anxiety about not knowing. Mirrored development introduces tolerance for ambiguity. Not everything needs to be named immediately. Not every feeling requires translation. This tolerance is a sign of internal safety. When safety exists within, silence is no longer threatening. In this state, both individuals become less interested in being right and more interested in being real. Image collapses. Performance fades. There is less concern about how one is perceived and more care for how one is aligned. This shift alone neutralizes power struggles. Authority becomes intrinsic rather than negotiated. Mirrored development also reshapes desire. Desire becomes less about possession and more about resonance. It is no longer driven by lack, but by recognition. Recognition does not demand proximity. It acknowledges truth. When two people recognize each other clearly, desire becomes cleaner. It is no longer fueled by fantasy or fear of loss. It becomes an invitation rather than a pull. At this point, symmetry creates a shared ethical field. Both individuals are less willing to compromise integrity for comfort. They would rather remain aligned than temporarily connected. This mutual ethic prevents premature convergence. It ensures that when alignment becomes relational rather than parallel, it is sustainable. Another critical aspect is that mirrored development often includes divergent lessons. One may be learning emotional articulation while the other is learning emotional containment. One may be learning vulnerability while the other is learning boundaries. These differences are not mismatches. They are complementary calibrations. Alignment does not require identical growth paths, only compatible internal structures. This compatibility reveals itself through pacing. Neither person rushes the other's process. There is an intuitive respect for timing without trying to manage it. This respect is not passive, it is informed. It arises from trust in the process rather than attachment to control. Control dissolves when confidence replaces fear. Mirrored development also strips away the need for validation through suffering. Earlier stages often romanticize pain as proof of depth. In alignment, suffering is not required to legitimize connection. Growth becomes less dramatic because it is no longer resisted. Ease replaces intensity, not because love diminished, but because clarity removed friction. When symmetry is present, both individuals begin to orient toward contribution rather than extraction. The question subtly shifts from, what can I get to? What can I sustain? This shift is foundational. Relationships fail not because of lack of feeling, but because of lack of capacity. Mirrored development increases capacity on both sides. Capacity includes emotional regulation, accountability, patience, and presence. These qualities cannot be borrowed from another person. They must be cultivated independently. When both have done this work, interdependence becomes possible without collapse. Interdependence is different from dependency. It is mutual support between two stable systems, not survival between two fragile ones. One of the quiet truths of mirrored development is that it often feels anticlimactic. There is no dramatic breakthrough moment, no sudden flood of certainty. Instead, there is a gradual sense of rightness, a calm recognition that something has settled. This is why aligned connections often feel understated to outsiders. They lack chaos, but they carry weight. Symmetry without dependency also preserves freedom. Neither person feels trapped by expectation or obligation. Choice remains alive. And paradoxically, this freedom strengthens commitment rather than weakening it. Commitment chosen freely carries more integrity than commitment chosen under pressure. Ultimately, mirrored development prepares both individuals for encounter without illusion. Whether that encounter becomes relational collaborative or simply internal closure, it occurs cleanly. There is no residue of confusion, no lingering sense of what if. Clarity and peace together dissolve regret because they integrate experience rather than fragment it. Alignment in its truest form is not about two people completing each other. It is about two complete individuals recognizing compatibility without distortion. Mirrored development ensures that recognition is not premature. It allows symmetry to emerge naturally without dependency, without urgency, and without self-betrayal. When that happens, whatever unfolds next together or apart unfolds with integrity. Awareness and action are often mistaken for the same thing, but they operate on entirely different levels. Awareness is internal. It is the moment something becomes visible, the point at which truth is recognized rather than avoided. Action is external. It is the decision to let that truth reorganize behavior, risk comfort, and alter direction. Many people experience awareness without ever crossing into action. This gap is where most transformations stall. Awareness can be emotional. It can arrive as longing, nostalgia, regret, or sudden insight. These experiences feel powerful, but they do not require courage. They can be felt privately, safely, without consequence. Action, however, demands exposure. It asks for accountability, humility, and willingness to be changed by what one now sees. This is why recognition is not proven by emotion, but by movement. Feeling something deeply does not mean one is ready to honor it. True recognition requires courage because it destabilizes familiar patterns. Acting on clarity often means admitting error, releasing control, or stepping into vulnerability without guarantee of outcome. Courage is not intensity, it is steadiness under risk. It is the willingness to stand in truth, even when it costs pride or disrupts routine. Without courage, awareness becomes self-soothing rather than transformative. This is also why rushed realizations tend to collapse. When insight arrives too quickly or under emotional pressure, it lacks integration. It has not passed through reflection, responsibility, and restraint. Rushed awareness seeks relief rather than alignment. It wants immediate resolution to discomfort, not long-term coherence. As a result, the action it produces is unstable, grand gestures without follow-through declarations, without endurance. Guided realizations endure because they mature internally before being expressed externally. They are allowed to settle to confront resistance, to clarify motive. In this process, illusion is stripped away. What remains is not excitement, but conviction. Conviction does not fluctuate with mood. It does not require constant reassurance. It moves deliberately because it understands the weight of what it chooses. Guided clarity also respects timing. It does not force outcome to prove sincerity. It waits until internal alignment can support external consequence. This waiting is not hesitation, it is preparation. When action finally occurs, it is not impulsive, it is precise. It carries the strength of something that has been tested internally and found solid. Choice is the final test of clarity because choice reveals priority. It translates inner truth into lived reality. Anyone can recognize something in theory. Few are willing to choose it when choice requires sacrifice. Choice exposes whether clarity is genuine or performative. If awareness does not change behavior, it remains incomplete. In this sense, clarity is not validated by understanding, but by decision. Decision is where alignment becomes real. It is where recognition proves itself through commitment, consistency, and consequence. Emotion may initiate awareness, but only choice completes it. And when choice is made from integrated clarity rather than rushed emotion, it does not collapse under pressure. It holds because it was chosen with courage, not impulse. Attraction-driven bonds and alignment-driven unions may look similar on the surface, but they are built on entirely different foundations. One is fueled by chemistry, intensity, and emotional charge. The other is sustained by clarity, maturity, and shared direction. Understanding the distinction is essential because many people confuse excitement with truth and intensity with depth, only to find themselves repeatedly drawn into connections that burn brightly but cannot last. Attraction-driven bonds begin with stimulation. There is often a strong emotional or physical pull, a sense of urgency, and a feeling of being alive in the other person's presence. These connections tend to activate desire, curiosity, fantasy, and projection. They feel magnetic because they awaken something dormant, but what they awaken is not always alignment. Often it is unmet need, unresolved patterning, or emotional hunger seeking expression. Attraction itself is not false, but it is incomplete. It is a doorway, not a foundation. Because attraction operates primarily through the nervous system, it is reactive. It thrives on unpredictability, tension, and emotional highs and lows. The bond feels intense precisely because it is unstable. There is excitement in the uncertainty, stimulation in the chase, and validation in being desired. But intensity requires fuel, and that fuel is often anxiety, fear of loss, or the need for reassurance. When the intensity fades, as it inevitably does, the connection struggles to sustain itself. What once felt electric begins to feel empty or confusing. Alignment-driven unions operate differently. They are not born from urgency, but from recognition. The pull is quieter, steadier, and less dramatic. Instead of activating anxiety, alignment calms the nervous system. Instead of creating obsession, it creates focus. The connection does not demand constant attention to survive. It endures even in silence. This is why alignment is often overlooked at first. It does not shout. It does not overwhelm. It feels natural rather than intoxicating. Stability in an alignment-driven union is not boredom, nor is it a lack of passion. It is grounded confidence. It is the sense that one does not need to perform, compete, or prove worth to remain connected. Stability means the relationship does not hinge on emotional volatility. Disagreement does not threaten the bond. Distance does not automatically create fear. Silence does not feel like abandonment. There is trust, not because nothing goes wrong, but because both individuals are capable of meeting difficulty with maturity rather than defense. This calm is often misunderstood in a culture conditioned to equate love with intensity. Many people have learned to associate excitement with meaning, mistaking nervous activation for passion. But excitement fluctuates. It depends on novelty, stimulation, and emotional contrast. Calm, on the other hand, is consistent. It does not spike and crash. It holds. Calm is what allows a connection to deepen over time rather than burn out. Peace is the true marker of truth, because truth does not require constant reinforcement. When something is aligned, it settles the body and clarifies the mind. There is less internal argument, less second-guessing, less need to analyze every interaction. Peace does not mean the absence of desire. It means desire is integrated rather than consuming. One can want deeply without losing stability. One can love fully without losing self-possession. Truth feels peaceful because it aligns internal reality with external experience. There is no split between who you are and how you show up. No part of you needs to be hidden, exaggerated, or suppressed to maintain the connection. This coherence creates safety, and safety is what allows intimacy to mature. Without safety, intimacy remains performative or conditional. Maturity is the foundation of lasting connection because alignment requires capacity, not just feeling. Mature individuals can regulate their emotions without outsourcing responsibility to the relationship. They can tolerate discomfort without resorting to avoidance or control. They can communicate honestly without weaponizing vulnerability. Maturity allows two people to meet as whole individuals rather than as unmet needs trying to complete each other. In attraction-driven bonds, conflict often becomes proof of passion. Emotional volatility is mistaken for depth. In alignment-driven unions, conflict becomes information. It reveals differences that can be navigated rather than battles that must be won. Maturity allows partners to stay present during difficulty without collapsing into fear or defensiveness. This presence builds trust far more effectively than intensity ever could. Another key difference lies in time. Attraction wants immediacy. It pushes for closeness before understanding, fusion before discernment. Alignment respects pacing. It allows connection to unfold at a rate that preserves clarity. This does not mean slowness for its own sake. It means intentionality. Each step is integrated before the next is taken. This is why alignment feels solid. It is built, not rushed. Alignment-driven unions also do not rely on constant validation. Each person brings self-respect into the connection. The relationship enhances life rather than becoming its center. There is room for individuality, growth, and autonomy. Attraction-driven bonds often collapse under this kind of space because they rely on intensity to feel real. Alignment grows stronger with space because it is rooted in trust. Ultimately, attraction may initiate connection, but alignment sustains it. Attraction answers the question, do I feel drawn? Alignment answers the deeper question, can we move in the same direction without losing ourselves? Stability is not the absence of emotion. It is emotion held within structure. Peace is not lack of passion. It is passion that does not destabilize. And maturity is not perfection. It is the willingness to meet love with responsibility. Lasting connection is not built on how strongly two people feel in the beginning, but on how well they can remain aligned when feeling is no longer the only thing carrying the bond. When excitement fades, truth remains. When illusion dissolves, peace settles. And where peace is present, alignment has already begun. Surrender and self-abandonment are often confused because both involve letting go, but they move in opposite directions internally. One deepens integrity, the other dissolves it. The distinction matters because many people believe they are trusting the process, when in reality they are slowly disconnecting from themselves. Self-abandonment occurs when letting go is driven by fear. Fear of loss, fear of conflict, fear of being misunderstood or left behind. In self-abandonment, a person suppresses their perceptions, instincts, or needs in order to preserve connection or avoid discomfort. They override inner truth to maintain external stability. Over time, this creates fragmentation. The self is split between what is felt and what is expressed. The cost is subtle at first, but cumulative. Resentment builds, confusion increases, identity weakens. Surrender, by contrast, is not rooted in fear but in clarity. It is the act of releasing control without releasing self-truth. Nothing essential is given up. Nothing internal is silenced. Surrender does not ask you to betray your knowing. It asks you to stop interfering with outcomes you cannot command. You remain fully present, fully intact, and fully honest, while allowing reality to move without your manipulation. This is why surrender feels stabilizing rather than diminishing. You are not disappearing. You are standing still enough to let alignment complete itself. Trust is what separates surrender from collapse. True trust does not blur identity. It anchors it. When trust is present, you no longer need to contort yourself to influence results. You do not over-explain, over-perform, or over-anticipate. You act when action is required and remain still when it is not. This steadiness strengthens identity because it reinforces an internal reference point. You are guided by what you know, not by what you fear might happen if you do nothing. Many people assume that trust makes them passive or vulnerable to loss. In reality, mistrust is what destabilizes identity. When you do not trust truth to surface on its own, you attempt to manage perception, timing, emotion, or outcome. This management creates anxiety and erodes self-respect. You become preoccupied with maintaining an image, sustaining a connection, or preventing an ending. Trust ends this cycle. It returns authority to reality itself. Allowing truth to surface without interference does not mean disengagement. It means non-distortion. You do not rush clarity. You do not delay it either. You do not force conversations prematurely, nor do you avoid them indefinitely. You allow understanding to mature to the point where it can stand on its own. Interference through pressure, explanation, persuasion, or performance often delays truth rather than accelerating it. Truth emerges most cleanly when the noise around it quiets. What is real does not require constant management because it is self-consistent. It does not collapse when attention is removed. It does not need repeated justification to exist. Reality holds its shape. When something is aligned, it remains recognizable even through distance, silence, or time. Management becomes necessary only when something is unstable, performative, or conditional. The impulse to manage is often a signal of misalignment, not devotion. Reaffirming this is not about detachment or emotional withdrawal. It is about integrity. You remain emotionally available without becoming emotionally dependent. You remain open without becoming porous. You care without contorting. This balance is not learned through force. It emerges through trust. Trust in your perception. Trust in timing, and trust that truth does not need to be rescued. Surrender, then, is not the loss of agency, but its refinement. You stop expending energy on control and redirect it toward presence. You stop negotiating with fear and begin standing in clarity. And from that position, whatever is real has space to reveal itself fully without distortion, without coercion, and without you having to disappear for it to happen.